Long before the world knew the name Nigeria, there was a land rich in life, rhythm, and meaning. A land where kingdoms rose and fell, where the drumbeat was the language of the soul, and where trade routes connected distant lands. From the Nok civilization, one of the oldest in Africa, to the empires of Oyo, Benin, and Kanem-Borno, this land thrived on culture, trade, and art. It was a place of pride, learning, and strength. But then, the ships came. They came with smiles, mirrors, and promises, but their true purpose was darker. The transatlantic slave trade began. A human tragedy that would last for over 300 years, from Badagry to Calabar. Millions of Africans' fathers, mothers, and children were taken, shackled in chains, forced onto ships, and sold into slavery across the Atlantic. Entire villages disappeared, families were torn apart, the air of Africa filled with silence, yet, even in chains, the African spirit never broke. Songs, stories, and faith kept the flame of identity alive. A fire that one day would burn again. By the 1800s, the slave trade had ended, but a new kind of control began. Britain turned from slave traders to colonizers. At the Berlin Conference, European powers carved Africa like a pie, drawing borders without knowing her people. Nigeria's fate was sealed not in Africa, but in Europe. In 1914, Lord Lugard merged the northern and southern protectorates, calling it Nigeria from the river Niger that flowed through its heart. But this union was not for Nigerians. It was for British convenience. The Hausa, Yoruba, Igbo, and hundreds of ethnic groups suddenly became one nation under a flag that was not their own. For decades, Nigerians worked under British rule. They built roads, worked on plantations, and paid taxes to a foreign crown. Schools were built, but only for a few, a small educated elite. Out of these classrooms rose the first generation of thinkers, young Nigerians who would later challenge the British Empire itself. They studied abroad. They read about freedom, revolutions, and democracy, and they returned home, determined to fight not with weapons, but with words. By the 1930s and 1940s, the spirit of resistance was growing. Newspapers became weapons. Words became bullets of change. Women like Funmilayo Ransome Kuti led movements against unfair taxes. Men like Herbert Macaulay questioned the very foundation of colonial authority. The people were finding their voice. When World War II broke out, thousands of Nigerians fought for the British Empire. They saw war, courage, and death. But when they returned, they asked, why should we fight for freedom abroad when we don't have it at home? The war changed everything. Around the world, colonies demanded independence. India became free in 1947. The winds of change were blowing across Africa. By the 1950s, the cry for independence grew louder. Political parties formed, the NCNC, the Action Group, and the Northern People's Congress. Leaders debated, rallied, and negotiated the nation's future. It wasn't easy. Regional rivalries threatened unity. The British called it gradual self-government, but Nigerians were ready to rule themselves. Then, at last, October 1st, 1960. Under the golden sun, a new nation was born. Green and white flags fluttered, drums echoed, and tears of joy filled the air. Nigeria was free. At the heart of that freedom stood great men and women whose names would forever live in history. Nnamdi Azikiwe, Zik of Africa, visionary of Pan-African unity. Tafawa Balewa, the teacher who became the first prime minister. Ahmadu Bello, the Sardauna of Sokoto, a bridge between faith and politics. Obafemi Awolowo, the thinker who dreamed of education for all. And Funmilayo Ransome Kuti, the fearless woman who defied colonial power. They were not perfect, but together they gave Nigeria her voice, her vision, and her independence. Independence was not an ending. It was a beginning. A nation of over 250 ethnic groups had to learn how to walk as one. There were challenges, political divides, regional rivalries, and the heavy shadow of colonial legacy. But there was also hope and pride. The story of Nigeria's independence is not only about leaders or flags. It's about a people who refused to be forgotten. From the dark hulls of slave ships to the bright morning of October 1st, 1960, Nigeria proved one truth: no matter how long the night, the sun will rise again. And when it did, it rose over the giant of Africa proud, powerful, and free. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more historical documentaries and untold stories, and uncover the secrets they never taught you in school.